Welcome to the Speaking of Jazz podcast series with Manny Kellogg, in association with Music Tribes Unite News. Now let's get started.
Well, jazz lovers, hello once again. And I would like to welcome you to season 3 of Speaking of Jazz with Manny Kellogg. And we want to thank you so much for supporting us and tuning in for the last 20 episodes. Today, I'm very honored to have a very, very, very good friend of mine. He's a radio personality on PFW in Washington, D.C. He's also an educator. And matter of fact, the man is, he's quite knowledgeable in jazz. I'd like for you to please welcome my dear friend, Mr. Rusty Hassan. How you doing, my man? Let's talk.
Doing fine, man. And thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk about this music that we love. You know, this music that's called jazz. You know, there's always some controversy over the terminology itself. But as I got into a conversation with A.B. Spellman, who has a NEA Jazz Masters Award named after him and a jazz scholar, he said he's learned to accept the word, you know.
Okay.
Even though some of the stellar artists in it, like Duke Ellington, didn't care for it, it's one we have to accept, and it's a catch-all in terms of this type of music that I've been in love with since I was about I'd say 12 years old. You know.
Okay, very good. Well, tell me, Rusty, how? You know, I'm just being kind of low-keyed and shooting from the hip. How did you get involved so heavy and so deep with jazz?
Because I fell in love with the music at an early age. Growing up in Connecticut in the 1950s, I listened to the radio a lot, and a lot of popular music. It was a time of the Drifters with songs like "Up on the Roof" and Elvis Presley kind of dominating things. But Sarah Vaughan had a tune called "Broken Hearted Melody" that I
remember that. Yeah.
The flip side on the 45 that we had laying around the house was Misty, you know. Yeah. And then one day I was into making model airplanes, you know, fighter planes from World War II and stuff like that. And on a New Year's Day, it was New Year's 1959, I was making a model airplane and I'm shifting around on the radio, and somebody was playing the 1938 Benny Goodman Carnegie Hall concert. And so supposedly in the can for decades, but in the early 1950s, they released it as a long-playing album, a 3-album set. And this radio announcer, I guess, was anticipating the 20th anniversary of the concert, and he played it in its entirety. And it included a jam session that had Lester Young, Johnny Hodges, Count Basie, Cootie Williams, I think, was there from the Ellington Orchestra, along with Johnny Hodges. And it just grabbed me. You know, I was already leaning towards the music. And so I shifted from making model airplanes to buying albums. And this was the first couple of albums that I bought was from this concert at a local Woolworths. They had it in Woolworths. So my first album was Benny Goodman Carnegie Hall concert. Then the third album I bought, and I don't know how I got into it, but it was an album called Dizen Bird, Royal Roost label. And it was from another Carnegie Hall concert from 1947 that Charlie Parker was a guest artist with Dizzy Gillespie and his band. And they did things like Groovin' High, and the sound quality wasn't that great, but the music just cut through. And as I got into the music, I discovered that I was born on the day that Charlie Parker recorded "Now's the Time" in Coco and Classic Recordings in 1945. So Bird became my sign.
Okay.
And then I had a friend of mine, a buddy, 8th and 9th grade. We became friends, and his older brother, who was in the Air Force, left his jazz albums behind at home. And so I was listening to recordings like For Musicians Only with Dizzy Gillespie, and Stan Getz, Duke Ellington's Jazz Party. You know, so we'd be listening to albums together. And then we started going out, making trips to the city. So we saw the Daily News Jazz Festival that had Sonny Rollins with his Bridge Quartet. When the album The Bridge came out, Dave Brubeck Quartet was there, and he had guest artist Carmen McRae singing. And Maynard Ferguson had an album called Maynard 61, and that band played at this concert at the Daily News Jazz Festival at Madison Square Garden.
Oh, boy.
And, my friend Butch Feddick, God bless his soul, he died a few years ago. He was, the one pushing me. Come on, they're like, Mikey, you can taste this. Come on, let's go here. So we were 17 years old. And he said, look, we'll tell our parents we're spending the weekend at each other's house. And let's go to the Newport Jazz Festival. We drove my 1954 Studebaker from Greenwich, Connecticut to Newport, Rhode Island. And we're there, for the long weekend. And at that festival in the afternoon, Herbie Mann played. He's recorded an album live at Newport. And it had Potato Valdez and, the Afro-Cuban sound to it.
Yeah.
And on July 7th, the last performer to play was coming on after Jimmy Smith had the crowd dancing on their chairs. He was cooking, didn't want to stop. The last performer was John Coltrane.
Yeah.
And he had McCoy Tyner, Jimmy Garrison, and Roy Haynes was the drummer on that gig because Elton Jones was otherwise engaged. And I just got drawn into that, the sound of the soprano and my favorite things, And my friend is tugging and pulling on me. He says, we got our summer jobs to get back to the next, later that morning, actually. But I said, no, I got to hear this. And that really pulled me into John Coltrane. And we did make it back to our summer jobs, and our parents were none the wiser, And
you got the car back okay, huh?
Yeah, well, the car just drove fine. It held up and back to the Newport Jazz Festival in 1963. So I came to D.C. to attend Georgetown University.
Okay.
And while at Georgetown, I took my handful of jazz albums with me and kept my interest in the music. And there was a club at 11th and U Street called the Bohemian Caverns. Roommate of mine, my sophomore year in 1965, Toby Mason and I decided to head over to the caverns to see what was happening. And there was a recording truck outside the club. And we went outside the club. It was a big, truck with a recording facility and stuff like that. Cables going into the club. And Ramsey Lewis was performing at the Bohemian Caverns. There was a popular R&B tune floating around at that time that he recorded, called The In Crowd.
I remember The In Crowd.
So I was clapping in the audience along with everybody else. I'm in with The In Crowd. It was like, and that record came out that year. Big hit for Ramsey Lewis, and I'm there with it.
Yes.
A month later, I saw John Coltrane performing at the Caverns. This time I went by myself. I was going down the steps, and Jimmy Garrison was doing this bass solo intro. And then Elton Jones came in on the drums, and McCoy Tyner on the piano, and Train on he played the tenor throughout that whole set, and it was intense. And after it was over with, he's walking by me, and I couldn't say anything.
Yeah.
So I just was tongue-tied. I said, "No, that can't say that," And years later. Over the years, I got to know McCoy Tyner very well. Conversations at the Blues Alley bar and stuff like that. And when I told him that story, he laughed. He said, "John would have loved to have talked to you. Just not about sports. He wasn't into that, but anything about music, philosophy, or whatever. He would have loved it. But the real thrill for me was again learning these artists that I got to hear, and see them perform." And as a student at Georgetown, we had an FM radio station that we really wasn't paying too much attention to. And I guess it was following year, 65 was when I saw Ramsey Lewis and Coltrane at the Caverns. I'm at a lunch place, restaurant, nothing fancy. It was a place where students would drink beer and stuff. And I'm there with friends having some beer at a table. And I see somebody ordering food at the counter holding jazz albums under his arm. And he passed the hypnotist test. I had to check him out. I said, "Well, let me see what you got." And we were looking through his albums, talking about the music. And he said, "Look, I just use these on my radio show, but I got to give it up because I have to take a class at that time. You want to do it?" Oh, sure. Okay. I stumbled into radio. It was all serendipity. He said, "Come by next Monday and I'll show you what to do."
Just like that.
Just like that. So I went to the station. The campus station is 90.1 FM on the dial, WGTB. And I started doing radio around 1966. As a student, I kept doing the show. And after I graduated, I was a Vista volunteer. Program was connected to the university, and I just kept the radio show going for a couple of years after I graduated.
Okay. And
as a Vista volunteer, I got involved with a community organization called the New Thing Art and Architecture Center. And they were located in Adams Morgan on 18th Street. And in fact, it was at the New Thing where I met my wife. Sandra Barrett was teaching African dance. She was part of Melvin Deal's African Heritage Dancers and Drummers.
Okay.
And we will be celebrating an anniversary next year. We got married in 1969. So we got, 53 years of marriage together.
Man, happy, golden.
Yeah, the New Thing had jazz performances at St. Margaret's Church on Connecticut Avenue. And the director of the program was Topper Carew, who did a couple of other things after he left the New Thing. He actually produced a movie called D.C. Cab. But I had him on my radio show on WGTB, which I kept doing as a Vista volunteer. He decided, well, this radio thing is pretty good. And somehow WAMU and Topper Carew hooked up, and they started a jazz in the afternoon called the New Thing Root Music Show on Sunday afternoons, which came on the air in July of 1969.
Okay.
I helped Topper put the show on the air. And then Sandra and I got married that August. And in September, we went to Europe. In Europe, I hooked up with the older brother of a classmate of mine, Carolyn Jackson. And we used to cut class to go to the Howard Theater to hear the rhythm and blues and soul acts. And her older brother was Ambrose Jackson, was in the house band. And he moved to Paris. And I had his address. No phones back then, no cell phones.
Right.
Waiting list for house phones in Paris. Met Ambrose, and he hooked us up, introduced us to the musicians in the Art Ensemble of Chicago, Roscoe Mitchell, Joseph Jarman, Anthony Braxton, and other folks. While in Paris, we saw Miles Davis in concert with Cecil Taylor.
Yeah.
It was a real incredible jazz group. Archie Shepp was there. And so I came back to the States with a number of albums that were recorded in Europe by the avant-garde artists that I just mentioned, and hooked back into the New Thing. And started doing the New Thing Root Music Show throughout the 70s on WAMU. And during the 70s, it was a real golden era for jazz radio in Washington. WHUR came on the air primarily as a jazz station. And two of my close friends, Yale Lewis and Ron Sutton, were both affiliated with HUR back then. Yale Lewis, known as the Ebony Godfather, one of those great radio voices. He was one of the first announcers on WHUR. And they were working out of a demountable, and I never forget taking my toddler daughter, Aisha, to visit Yale at the studio, and saying, hey, what's happening, and Yale went on to do a show at WETA, and Ron Sutton came in to do the evening jazz program. And I was on WAMU on Sunday. Ron was on every evening on WHUR. WGTB was still doing jazz in the mid-'70s. And Ron and I would trade off doing radio shows, doing shows dedicated to Charlie Parker. I'd come on his show or he'd come on my show. There was this real synergy for the music.
Okay.
And, some great stories about one time Geraldine Parker, one of Charlie Parker's wives, was brought to the studio by another announcer, Eddie Lemon. And we were talking about a movie about Bird. And this is long before Clint Eastwood did his movie. Ron asked Geraldine, well, who would you like to see play Bird in the movie? And she said, Gene Ammons.
Okay.
And we looked at each other, and Ron said, Gene Ammons died last year.
Mm-hmm.
And Geraldine said, shit, what's dead? And Ron said, we got to go to a commercial because on that radio station, you couldn't say like that,
Yeah.
Another time, Ron invited me over to do a taped interview with Sonny Rollins, and I got to know Sonny Rollins from that experience of meeting him in the studio and then hearing him perform. Having people at that time Ron Holloway, for example, was one of my friends who go to see people like Dizzy Gillespie and Sonny Rollins and become proteges of these great artists. And so Ron Holloway and I are still connected. But it was a real golden age for the music back then. I had on my show in the 70s and into the early 80s on WAMU, I had Dexter Gordon come by the studio when he was in the States. I had Art Blakey. Art Blakey kind of adopted me, you know. I mean, we'd hang out together whenever he'd play in town. I was really blessed. The Heath brothers, Jimmy Heath and Percy Heath, would come through. Became friends with Stanley Cowell, who was playing with them at that time. So I was really blessed to be doing radio during all this time, this golden age of meeting the musicians over the years and having them come by the studio. I interviewed Sun Ra twice.
Really?
I mean, that was really an amazing experience, you know, and having him in the studio with me. I still have the LPs that he gave me and plain white paper, you know. I mean,
the plain. I remember. Yeah.
You know, really, really fortunate in terms of getting into radio early on and consistently doing a show one day a week. At one point, WAMU was going to do like an overnight jazz program. You know, it's like almost a full-time job. Well, at that point, I had already worked as a sort of a kind of a social worker, a relocation counselor for the Redevelopment Land Agency in the 14th Street Urban Renewal area. And I became active in the union at work. Became so active that I became president of the local. And in 1978, when a position opened up on the staff of the union, I applied for it and got the job. And so in the early 80s, when WAMU said, you know, hey, you can be the all-night DJ, I'm looking at what they were going to pay, and I'm looking at what I was getting paid with the union job, and I had a whole career there. I said, no, I'll keep the radio 1 day a week and keep the union job to pay the bills. You know,
I hear you. Yeah.
You know, it was a wise choice. I got a pension now from that job. You know, so I had a full career as a union representative, handling arbitrations, doing administrative hearings, organizing, and all of that from 1978 until 2013. Now, another aspect of my jazz world occurred this way. When I was a student at Georgetown, there was no jazz history course or anything like that. I took a music appreciation course with the Washington Post music critic, Paul Hume. And he was rather upset because a lot of people heard it was an easy class and it was overfilled. And I have to admit, I didn't get that good of a grade.
Okay.
But many times, years later, I'm on a music panel with Dr. Billy Taylor for the jazz program at NPR. And on the classical side was Paul Hume. Sitting having dinner with him. I told him, well, I learned a lot about music taking the class. I didn't tell him what kind of grade I got, but he was familiar with my radio show.
Very good, yeah.
So, you know, but I heard that they were teaching a jazz history course, and it was taught by a guy named Dick Webster. And I went over to check out the class, and at that time, I had a bass that I was not really playing. And Dick Webster, who was teaching the jazz history class, was not a jazz musician. He was a bassist with the National Symphony. So I did get my one lesson from Dick, from a real top-notch bassist. And I didn't have the time, discipline, or talent. And didn't deal. I gave up the bass very, very quickly because I played records. But Dick said, look, the symphony's going on tour for a couple of weeks, and I need somebody to teach a class. Will you do it? Gosh, teach a class? I don't know. Okay. You know, serendipity. I said, okay. He said, by the way, the continuing education program is looking for somebody to teach a jazz history course at night. My day job's at night, so I can't do it. If doing the teaching gig for me works out for you, put in a proposal and I'm sure you'll get it. So I did his class and I wrote up something for the Georgetown School for Summer and Continuing Education. And they said, well, yeah, teach a jazz history course. It was a 9-credit class, didn't pay much, hardly anything. I mean, adjunct salaries were great compared to what I was getting paid for that. But I'm interacting with adults who are into the music. And then a couple of things happened. One, somebody from George Washington contacted me. Can you teach a jazz history class? I said, no, I got a day job. Yeah. And then somebody contacted me at American University, and I'm doing WAMU on Sundays at American on the campus. And they said, look, the person who's teaching the evolution of jazz and rock is going on sabbatical. Can you teach the class? I said, geez, I don't know. I'm sure you got it scheduled during the day and I have a day job. What evening would you like?
All right.
I said, okay, Monday sounds fine, And so they scheduled this class Mondays at 5:30. And around that time, I, as a union person, they had a labor studies program at the University of Columbia. And so I was taking classes there, and I rolled in the master's program at UDC sometime in the 80s also. And of course, my wife and I had two kids. So I'm really keeping busy with this stuff. And the worst thing was at that time into the 70s, into the early 1980s, hanging out at all the jazz clubs and stuff like that. I love to drink. I was stone alcoholic, I was really into drinking also.
Yeah.
So I quit drinking in 1983.
Okay.
Kept myself occupied with the music, doing Jazz Sunday on WAMU. We had a nice anniversary for the station. Gave me a party in 1984, 15 years of the New Thing Root Music Show. And I'm teaching in the mid-'80s at American University. So I'm really delving into the music,
Right.
And teaching was fun, because I'm teaching about African-American culture and this music that's grown out of it. And I'm being very inclusive about the musical genres, but the focus is on jazz. And, I'm pretty much a jazz purist, but, I'm
keeping jazz alive.
But also stretch it in terms of the audience that's in the class. On the radio, I learned how to program my love for very avant-garde music in a way that I will pick and choose recordings that were more accessible to the audience, but familiar with the Art Ensemble of Chicago or Cecil Taylor, stretching the boundaries of the music, but also get to the music that will not so much turn them off,
Right.
And also feature artists who are coming into town, cover birthdays. And so I've kept that format all of the 55 years I've been on the air.
That was my question next. And I was going to ask you, how long have you been in the business? You just told us, 55 years?
Yeah. Well, 1966 is when I started doing the 1 day a week on WGTB. And it's always been 1 day a week. So I've been really blessed from doing that, meeting these artists, a number of whom became my friends.
Yeah.
I got to know McCoy Tyner from talking to him at the bar at Blues Alley. And I think it was around 2006. He was performing for what was then the Duke Ellington Jazz Festival. It's now the D.C. Jazz Festival. And I got to introduce him on the stage. I'll say, well, ladies and gentlemen, I first heard McCoy Tyner in 1963 with John Coltrane at Newport at a jazz festival. And, of course, with Coltrane again at the Caverns. And I don't know how many times since then, but never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd be on the stage introducing you to one of the most influential pianists of the last 50 years. And here's Gary Bartz on alto sax, blah, blah, blah,
Yeah.
On a blank disc. I put it on and I hear me introducing him. He sent me the recording of the concert. And I had to really search to find an address to thank him. But I also got to thank him in person a couple of times. I mean, that was the kind of interaction that I've developed with musicians over the years that has really been a thrill for me.
Well, I have a question for you. Matter of fact, I got a couple more questions for you. Throughout your career, I know you have run into some very funny times and things. What are some of the most funniest things that you can remember in your career that you can share with us?
Ooh, boy.
Was that a good one?
It's an interesting one. Not so much funny, but interesting in a way. You know how as jazz enthusiasts become like sports enthusiasts?
Yeah.
You got you either love Steph Curry or you hate him, or LeBron James or whatever, and somehow Ron Sutton loved Clifford Brown. And he was always disparaging Miles Davis. You know? And in that interview that Ron invited me to, and this is at a time when Miles had just stopped playing for a while. There's that interim from around 76 to 81.
Right, yeah.
He got his career jump-started again in the 80s, so he wasn't really doing that much. And so Ron turns to Sonny and he said, who was it for you more important to have played with, Clifford Brown or Miles Davis? and Rollins said, you know, Ron, as much as I love Brownie, as much as I miss Clifford Brown to this day, and I still cry when I think about that accident, I have to say it was far more important for me to have worked with Miles Davis, who changed the direction of the music.
He did,
every time, you know, and that it was far important for me. And it was Ron didn't get the answer he anticipated or wanted, you know, but it was very telling about the perception that Sonny Rollins had in terms of the history of the music and his place in it, you know. And
sure.
You know, I presented Sonny Rollins with the Jazz and Justice Award from a program that WPFW gave at the Convention Center in I guess 2007. And I just, on a serendipitous moment, handed him my card with my address. I got a 2-page letter thanking me for that. Sonny Rollins talking about wearing his music hat or his political hat, you know, and just thanking me for what I was doing and stuff like that. Things that I will always treasure, having these connections with the music. And Manny, I'm a fan. I'm not a critic. I struggle. Yeah. I've written liner notes, but it's a struggle for me in a way, even though I was an English major. You know, I know I'm sharing the music that I love when I get on the airwaves, you know, and I've been blessed to have met my heroes over the years.
That's wonderful, man. You know, and I want to applaud you, Rusty, for your works and what I know of you have done, you know, as far as keeping jazz alive in the community. And I just think it's fantastic, you know, I applaud you to the highest, man, for doing that. You know, and I always say, don't stop swinging, keep it going, you know.
Absolutely. No, I'm gonna stay on the airways until I can't make it to the studio, you know.
I dig it.
We're really blessed with WPFW. You know, we just lost a few months ago Askia Muhammad, who's been doing Tuesday mornings for 40 years,
right,
you know,
right.
To the music and really very, very militant. But right now, you know, it's like the range of folks that we have. Larry Applebaum on Sunday afternoons, who, in his gig at the Library of Congress, discovered the recording of John Coltrane playing with Thelonious Monk at Town Hall and arranging to have that released through that in his work. Willard Jenkins with Late Night Jazz every Wednesday. Willard is not only the artistic director of the D.C. Jazz Festival, which is coming up Labor Day weekend with an incredible array of artists, but he how'd he put it? He was the arranger for Randy Weston's autobiography. He was the one who put the words into print that Randy Weston told him. You know, that kind of work, some serious scholarship and a labor of love, you know, in terms of the friendship. And, you know, and for me, having met Randy Weston, and actually I have a great photograph of my granddaughter with Randy Weston the year before he passed. It was doing a tribute to James Reese Europe at the Kennedy Center, you know, having that kind of connection.
Yeah.
You know, but having somebody like Willard doing a show on WPFW, Reuben Jackson alternating with Larry Applebaum every Sunday. Reuben's the archivist at the Felix Grant Jazz Archive. He was the archivist for the Duke Ellington archive at the Smithsonian before he took an early retirement and continues to write his poetry. But to have him as a colleague at UDC, where I've been teaching jazz history for a couple of years now, is really a thrill for me.
Very good. You know, again, I want to jump right in here real quick and just remind everyone that you're listening to Speaking of Jazz with me, Manny Kellogg, and I'm your host. I'm coming to you weekly with a different guest every week, and you'll never know who I have unless you tune in. So I would like to encourage you to go ahead and tune in to Speaking of Jazz with Manny Kellogg every week. And if you would like to be a guest on the show, all you have to do is email me at speakingofjazz.guest@gmail.com. That's speakingofjazz.guest@gmail.com. I want to dive right back in here because I got the best cat could give us some jazz history on the other end of the microphone. Let's dive back into. Welcome back, my man. Let's go.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, it's a real pleasure for me to be able to talk about this music and how fortunate I'm really blessed. You know.
Yes, I understand.
I've met these musicians and have someone like Art Blakey know who I am, or just to hang with back in the 70s and 80s. Stanley Cowell, who I had a long time friendship before he passed away a few years ago, and this continues, you know, with the artists that are coming through town, and the artists who live here and perform here. You know, folks like Nasser Abadeh or yourself, you know, performing at places like Alice's Jazz and Cultural Society or Westminster Church.
Yes.
You know, we got the major clubs. We got Keystone Corner up in Baltimore that Todd Barkin's been running for a couple of years now, celebrating 50 years of Keystone Corner, considering that he started a club of that name back in San Francisco in 1973.
I remember that.
You know, so 72. So it's 50 years of Keystone Corner.
Fantastic.
Andy Music also up in Baltimore, and Blues Alley back open and bringing in major artists here in D.C. You know, she's been around, 55 years now, I guess. You know, so you know we got a good jazz scene here, and as I mentioned before, the D.C. Jazz Festival coming up Labor Day weekend. You know, and
I'm looking forward to being there. I'm going to visit that. That's going to be something I've never been able to go because I've always been traveling at that time. Oh, wow.
Yes. Yeah.
I plan to be there. That's also my birthday weekend, so I'll be able to celebrate.
A great celebration. Yeah. Well, I'll be getting the jazz journalist Mary McPartland Willis Conover Award for broadcasting at some point during the festival.
Fantastic, man.
I got to hook up with Willard to select a performance for me to do the presentation.
Well, what are some of the things are you doing? I mean, as far as projects, are you working on any current projects right now? Well,
you know, one of the things, and I've been negligent, but I'm getting with Judith Corey, who's over she's like the emeritus person over the Willis Conover Jazz Archive at the University of the District of Columbia. And I've got, cassette tapes. Eddie Jefferson, for example, in 1978 on cassette. And there's a Sun Ra here. There's Rick Henderson. There's all kinds of things that we need to digitalize for the Felix Grant Jazz Archive. So these will be joining all those great interviews that Felix Grant did back in the 50s and 60s and 70s.
Very good, very good.
And so that's something I've been procrastinating on and putting aside. But that's one of the things. And again, you know, I live for my radio show every Thursday. Think about what am I going to do? You know, it's like
speaking of your radio show, you want to let us know, let the guests know when you're on the air?
Yeah, I'm on every Thursday from 10 until midnight at WPFW 89.3 FM in Washington, D.C. or WPFWFM.org streaming worldwide.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's been, you know, I'm really blessed because I was on WAMU from 1969 to start it. And then there's that time we were in Europe till 1987 when they dropped my show. And right away, I was pulled over to WD.C.U, which was the University of the District of Columbia's jazz station at 90.1 on the dial. Well, 90.1 on the dial was also the spot on the dial for WGTB. Back in the 70s, the Jesuits running Georgetown University got upset with the radicals on the radio station. And instead of kicking the radicals off, they gave away the station to UDC.
Really?
So around 1980, WD.C.U went on the air, Jazz 90. And in 1987, when WAMU kicked me off, Edith Smith called me, you got Sunday afternoons. We got Felix Grant on Saturday. And Felix Grant and I went on WD.C.U the same weekend. And he was there until he passed, and I was there until the station went off the air. There was a budget gap, a budget problem with the District of Columbia back in the 90s. And there was a control board that ran district finances, and they made the university sell the station license. And that's now C-SPAN radio at 90.1 on the dial.
Okay.
And I think, the budget gap of $13.5 million was closed, and a major cultural entity for the city itself was lost forever.
Oh, man.
Man. But WPFW picked me up right away, and other folks from the UDC station. So I've been on WPFW since 1997. In fact, I've been on PFW longer than any of the other stations that I had been with since.
Really? Fantastic. Congratulations.
And Thursday night's not a prime time, but it's a good time.
Yes.
Parking is easy. And a lot of artists will call in. I've interviewed a lot of artists who are playing either up at Keystone Corner or Blues Alley or other places, artists coming into town. A lot of those interviews are on YouTube now. My friend Burnett Thompson, who did a piano series at the Arts Club of Washington, curated and took a lot of those interviews and put them up on YouTube. One of the biggest thrills for me was Todd Barkin had Ron Carter call in when and I got that up on YouTube also, to have a conversation with Ron Carter was a thrill recently.
Did you ever get a chance to meet Ron? Yes,
I did. I've met him a couple of times. He actually performed at the Bohemian Caverns in the 2000s.
Okay.
When the club was reopened.
Yes. Well, my other question is, as we narrow down and get down to the finish line, being an educator and a mentor, what advice can you give to up-and-coming young musicians, writers, vocalists, and those that want to be on the radio? What advice can you give them?
Well, one of the things is it's always a struggle is for young folks who are really into this music, is to get their peers into the music, get them to hear what they're doing, and get to open them up to the music. For me, I've had a great time doing class. It's a smaller group, 20, 30 people, but it's educating them about how to listen to this music, how to appreciate it, and how to open your ears to the music. And here's an example. Back, it must be about 2010, 11, 12, something like that. I'm teaching at the University of Maryland University College, which has a lot of working folks, older folks in their 30s, 40s, even 50s. And I'm also teaching an undergraduate class at Georgetown with all the young, bright students that are there. So a saxophonist named Braxton Cook was in that class, or one of those classes. And I have students give me performance reports.
Okay.
And I don't assign performances. I don't say I want, you go here, go there for the review. Go here. If you have any question, ask me ahead of time. But just, give me the reviews, towards the end of the semester. I want 3 reviews before, the final exam. And during this time, on a Wednesday night, Lee Konitz was performing with the Bohemian. Brad Lindy had a big band working at Blues Alley on a Wednesday night, and he had Lee Konitz performing.
Okay.
So I went to see the show, and I'm there at the show, and I'm about leaving, and there are all these young Georgetown students to make sure that I saw them. Hey, I'm here, Professor. Hey, what's the show? And as I'm leaving, there's this African American woman from the UMUC class, and she comes up to me. I said, "Wow, somebody from the other class." She said, "Professor Hassan, do you think Mr. Konitz would sign the picture of him in our textbook?" I said, "Well, let's go find out." So I went up to the little dressing room at Blues Alley, knocked on the door, and I said, "Mr. Konitz, you may not remember me, but we met years ago at the One Step Down. We had a long conversation, and I'm on the radio, and I've been playing your music on the radio all my life. That I've been doing radio, blah blah blah. So I have a favor. My student come on and she wants to know if you'll sign the photo of you in our textbook, and he opened it up and said, wow, this is old. It was from 1949. He said, oh, great old photo. And he signed it, and And I got to see him again in New York at the Blue Note for a Jazz Journalists Awards thing and thank him again for that. I said, I'm really glad to do it. But for me, it was, wow. In this class, I have a 50-year-old black woman, African-American, who's into neo-soul, come out and hear this 83-year-old white guy playing the saxophone. I got to be doing something right. That moment really summarized why I teach this music. Here was a guy who's a contemporary, Charlie Parker, my musical hero, him and John Coltrane. He was, somebody who was part of this tradition, and she came to hear him, and then asked us to have the photograph signed. That really made it for me in terms of teaching this music. The thing I have with the younger musicians who are into music program like at UDC is how to get your peers to listen to this music, Okay. You're listening, you're listening to Clifford Brown and Lee Morgan and stuff like that, all your friends are listening to hip hop and stuff. How are we going to broaden that audience, and that's right. It. And someone says, well, I get folks to come to my recitals at school. I tap on them. If they're into something else, I do it. We turn the favor around. It's maybe one person at a time or whatever. But it's all about, audience development and how to encourage people to listen.
Right.
It's like this medium we're on now using the internet. All these jazz stations use the internet now. People are streaming the music to reach a more worldwide audience as radio is shifting, in terms of what they call it, celestial radio. We're still doing it. We're still doing it here in D.C. at WPFW, and it's an alternative in many ways. Back in the 70s and 80s, we had all these stations playing this music we call jazz. Mm-hmm. Right now, it's, PFW. I don't know what, if any jazz creeps into WHUR, WAMU does have Hot Jazz Saturday Night playing Rod Bamberger doing the history of the music up through the mid 1940s. And I listen to him. I learn a lot from listening to his show.
Really?
But it's, it's a set piece in terms of the history of the music, and it's an important in terms of the instruction. And he does very well for fundraising for WAMU. Ironically, they dropped his show. Some station manager said it didn't fit the format. And they brought him back, after a couple of years, and so.
It took 2 years for them to realize that he was good for them. Yeah,
absolutely, And he came back and, oh, man, folks really came through. And I wish PFW would have individual shows raised as much as he does to WAMU.
Really?
But it's a matter of generating the support for the music. What we do, and we are exceeding our goals now. It's really, the pandemic demonstrated that people can really rely upon a station like PFW to reach out for the music, learn what's happening, and keep things going.
Yeah. Well, I am down to the final little question, and I'm going to come out of the hip and hit you hard with it.
Uh-oh.
Put on your seatbelt, man.
Right.
What is jazz to you?
Oh, man, what is jazz to me? Jazz is wow. So it's the music of my life, number one. It's like, okay. God, I mean, it has been my lifetime, but it's been the culture. White bread guy growing up in Greenwich, Connecticut. When I got here to D.C. and got into the music, I got delved into a whole, what Ron Sutton called, it's about the preservation of a culture. When I met my wife, she was teaching African dance and a member of SNCC and part of the revolution at Howard University. And she was having some times with, in terms of her black nationalist friends and this guy she was marrying, and they figured I had to be black because who is Sandy doing this? And yet through her father, who was a jazz pianist on U Street back in the 40s, and his best friend was John Malachi, I had another connection to the music and to the culture. And so for me, the terminology jazz is something that's sort of like an umbrella, and as I mentioned, there was always a controversy over the term itself. But, at every stretch of the imagination, it's a broad covering of culture, Mm-hmm. I mean, I think of Andrew White, who's a saxophonist, who transcribed all of John Coltrane's solos, who lived in my Northeast neighborhood. Back in the 70s, he was the principal oboist with the American Ballet Theater Orchestra, played bass with Stevie Wonder and then the Fifth Dimension, and did his own jazz recordings on the saxophone. And so he embraced the breadth of the culture, even playing, classical music. And there's a whole other area of African-American classical music that we can delve into that goes back to the era of the early part of the 20th century. It's about, as I mentioned before, Ron Sutton called it the preservation of a culture, and it's all encompassing, and jazz music is an umbrella for a good part of it. And it's been my life.
Well, you are definitely the man that would know about the history of jazz. And again, I'm just overwhelmingly excited and excited to have been able to talk to you just a one-on-one, and just be able to share.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Manny, we have to flip the script on this. When you have a gig coming up or another recording coming out, I got to get you on the airwaves of WPFW because you have quite a history yourself. Stretching it, from Billy Preston to all the jazz stuff, and how that spectrum that we're, alluding to in the conversation is a part of your life.
Well, I am like you, Rusty. I'm truly blessed and highly favored. And I feel very blessed to be able to share and talk about my career throughout what I've done the past 61 years in the business. Again, I'm blessed to be able to sit with you and talk to you about it and laugh and talk and stuff like that, and before we get out of here, I just want to jump over again and remind our guests and listeners that you've been listening to Speaking of Jazz with Manny Kellogg. And I'm on podcasts once a week. Every week I have someone different. You never know who I have until you join in and check me out. And if you'd like to be a guest on this fantastic show, all you have to do is email at speakingofjazz.guests@gmail.com. That's speakingofjazz.guests@gmail.com. And I would like to thank you so much, Rusty, for taking time out of your busy schedule, because I know you're busy, to sit down and just have a chat, and I think it's been fantastic. And we definitely, like you said, we're going to have to do this again sometime, because don't think I don't listen to you, because you're the cat I listen to late night.
Right. Well, thank you.
But, I want to thank you for being here with me, being a friend of mine and coming out and supporting us when you can. And before we leave again, please let the listeners know how they can hear you on WPFW.
Every Thursday night from 10 until midnight, 89.3 FM in Washington, or streaming worldwide on whatever listening device you have at WPFWFM.org. Great. Thanks again, man. It's been a real pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you, my friend and brother. And I'm looking forward to doing it again, man. God bless your heart, man. And we'll talk again soon. Okay. Until then, you know what I'm getting ready to say. Keep swinging.
We hope you enjoyed the show and thank you for keeping jazz alive. Don't forget to follow us on our social media channels, and all the links are in the podcast description. That's it for now.